My name is Carl Roberts. I'm an attorney. I've been in commercial litigation for over 40 years, a lot of that in construction and technology, dealing with defects, deficiencies, miscommunication, and the like. With Mike Hastings, we're going to talk about protecting projects and protecting the participants in an era where cybersecurity is the new battlefield.
Hi, I'm Mike Hastings. At the height of a 30-year career in construction, risk management, and insurance, I started my own company in 2015, and now I serve as an independent consultant for large, complex, and highly engineered construction projects. For many, the reality of cybersecurity or cyber vulnerability exploded into our conscious over Thanksgiving in 2013. A cyber breach at Target stores gained hackers access to the credit card information of 40 million customers. The estimate was later expanded to over 70 million customers, and by February, the estimated cost of the breach was over $200 million. We all know about the breach, but did you know that the hack was traced back to a third-party HVAC vendor? Hackers stole their credentials, gained access to the network that controls HVAC at Target stores, and then found their way to the network that controlled the point-of-service financial transactions at cash registers.
Cyber breaches also can bring business activities to a halt. They did that for a hospital in California, where the people had to use runners and paper messages for a week because they couldn't get access to their files after a ransomware attack. Last October, the electric grid in the Ukraine was brought down by hackers who got into the systems that control it and took it down. Another form of attack is something called the distributed denial of service, and that can make a domain completely unusable by assaulting it with hundreds of thousands or millions of messages in a very short time. Just last month, the entire Lloyd's Bank system, ATMs, the like, was taken offline for several days by that kind of a system, by that kind of an attack. And a company that I'd never heard of before, DIN, which handles domain name regulation and the way you go from the names you use when you put in the domain to the actual place you're trying to reach, was taken offline, shutting down much of the internet.
So who's behind a cyber attack? Cyber attacks may be traced back to nation states who seek to steal industrial secrets, conduct espionage, or meddle in the outcome of our political process. It can be criminals who seek to use your financial data to commit tax fraud, to hold your systems for ransom, or sell your information to the highest bidder on the dark web. As I speak, automated bots, spiders, drones, and zombies are relentlessly working to exploit weaknesses in your systems and collect data whose value may be determined and realized at some later date. Finally, your own team could be at the heart of a cyber breach by making mistakes that create vulnerabilities or make data accessible, or who intentionally compromise your systems or sell your intellectual capital for profit or revenge. Whether you know it or not, veritable armies are mobilized 24 hours a day to breach your systems and prosper at your expense.
The Internet of Things refers to devices that communicate with each other over the Internet or other similar types of nets. They are often very poorly protected. They have very limited security. There's no means to update them when problems are discovered with the security, the minimal settings, or they'll have standard settings. Think of how many people go in and change the settings for access to the router you have at home. The same thing would be the case for a business. These are vulnerabilities, and construction sites and projects, the equipment that's used on them are full of Internet of Things devices. So the fastest growing form of crime, cybercrime, in this country and perhaps around the world is ransomware. Kaspersky Labs reports that there's one attack every 40 seconds against businesses and against people one attack every 10 seconds. SonicWall and the FBI estimated that $209 million was paid in ransom in the first quarter of 2016. Projecting that out with only a little bit of growth, that's $1 billion in ransom being paid last year. In its 12-month study, Kaspersky found that 42% of the businesses studied fell victim to a ransomware attack. 1 in 3 paid ransom. 1 in 5 never got their files back, even though they paid the ransom. Over 2/3 of the businesses lost part of their corporate files, and 1 in 4 lost several weeks trying to restore access. IBM released a report at the end of March that supported this data and spread it worldwide. Personal information that's stolen is sold on something referred to as the dark web. I wouldn't know how to find that, but there are people who do. A set of credentials to fabricate an identity, depending upon its quality, can bring from $50 to several $1,000s. That identity could be yours. And information on access or control systems and how projects will be used is also marketable. Okay, thank you. Is also marketable. Criminals might want it, competitors might want it. Think of information on how to get access to an airport, how to get in and around in eras of terrorists. Access information can also be used by hackers who want to take over the IoT devices and other devices you have in order to mount bot attacks on yet other targets. The way that it's done, Verizon has a study, it does it every year, and in their most recently released data breach investigation report, they say that hacking and malware are the major ways it approaches. This is a change from what was the case years ago, say 5 years ago, when insiders or similar things were major sources of breaches. Now it's outsiders hacking in and malware. Hacking refers to trying to break through the protection systems, the security barriers on a system. Malware refers to rogue programs. They could be viruses, trojans, bots, whatever they might be. And they can be picked up from attachments, from links on websites, from portable media like the thumb drive that was used to insert the Stuxnet virus into Iran's centrifuges, and Wi-Fi access points at hotels, coffee shops, and the like. Verizon has broken its data down by industry group. You'll be pleased to know that the construction industry is not a really high attention target yet. But it is a target, and there are attacks on it, and there are consequences.
And there have been substantiated reports of hackers planting infected media, such as thumb drives and power cords, at locations like Starbucks or libraries. They might be picked up and used by victims who unwittingly infect their devices and the devices they access with that malware.
So an increasingly popular and unfortunately effective method of attack is what's called phishing. Phishing is social engineering. A message is sent out and it tries to trick the recipient into responding in some way. Now, phishing is general. It can be random messages just sent out like free credit card offer, or sign up here, you might get $100 off this, or something of that sort. They're just strewn about. IBM found that 44% of spam actually had malware or a link that would lead to malware in it or connected to it. And of those, 85% of those attachments were in one way or another ransomware attachments. Targeted attacks, which is what we refer to as spear phishing, are used for usually higher value targets. Information gleaned from social media or from successful attacks on lower level personnel in a company will be used to salt a message so it looks like something you'd expect to get. When you go after it, problems can arise. One of the ones that's more notable is John Podesta, who whose entire email history for 10 years was exposed through something where he picked up a message that he should never have responded to and gave his credentials to someone far, far away that then made use of that to affect the last election. What do you do about this? Don't be afraid to make a phone call when you get a message that doesn't look right. And if you look at some of the examples here, you'll see misspellings, words that just don't fit, odd phrases. Is it out of context? Would you expect to receive that kind of request from the person who sent it to you? Is it against a policy? So, you've got a policy against shipping certain kinds of data outside of the company. And yeah, this may be somebody you know real well, it may be the vice president in charge of finance, but still, there's a policy there. Pick up the phone, make a call. Don't call the number in the message, because that itself might be part of the thing. Look up the phone number or look up the email address to do it. I have made a half a dozen calls to banks in the last 6 months when I've received messages like that. Only one of them was a legitimate message. The others were all fakes. Oh, okay, thank you. So the consequences to the direct victim of an attack may be altered or corrupted data or inaccessible data. There will probably be delays while you try to reconstruct the situation. If it's ransomware, you might have to rebuild your entire system, bring in backups and the like. If the damage goes to other targets, if it spreads from you to systems you're linked to, it can affect them. It can affect the entire project. And control monitoring systems, if affected, can undermine physical safety on a construction project. Anyone here who's been on a construction site knows how important that is. Contract provisions, as an example here, and basic tort law principles make the party responsible for something like this, the one who's the proximate cause, responsible for the larger scale damage. You don't want to be the party that spread one of these through a construction project.
The responsibility for many of the consequences of a cyber breach may be assumed by contract. And while the drafters of that contract might have insurance in mind, they don't always have a clear or realistic view of how that insurance would respond in the event of a breach. Just because you've complied with all of the insurance requirements in your contract doesn't mean that your insurance will protect you from every consequence that you've taken responsibility for. If you don't review your contracts with your insurance advisor and your counsel, you may be taking a big gamble that nothing will go wrong on your project.
Now, Mike started, can you back up one, please? Mike started by reference to target breach. Very few people have any understanding of just how time-consuming and expensive dealing with a data breach, especially personal information data breach, can be. A typical data breach response brings operations to a halt, affected systems have to be taken offline, and you have to contact law enforcement. You have to identify the affected people, customers, employees. You have to notify them immediately that their information has been compromised. That's also potentially a public relations nightmare. Imagine if every construction project you were working on that was in your portfolio at a given time suddenly was brought to a halt because all of your computer access, all your data was locked up. The PCI Security Standards Council, which mostly deals with payment cards, has estimated that it costs $3 million to deal with a major data breach. Ponemon has the same number. The Rand Corp thinks that number is ridiculously high. They put it closer to $200,000. To me, $200,000 is a lot of money.
Risk management and prevention. We all know firewalls are important for cybersecurity, right? Who would have imagined that Target Store's HVAC network could be used to access the credit card information of their customers? Experts recommend that effective cybersecurity requires engaging an entire organization, not only IT, but also human resources, executive groups, and even vendors. We've provided a list of 5 important questions to ask each of these groups and it's available with a copy of this presentation on the BIM Forum website. We have limited time today, but we can offer some good advice to take back with you. First, invest in cybersecurity. There are professional hackers out there, and you need professional help to protect yourself against them. Second, limit access to your network. Not only who can have access, but role-specific access so that someone with a need to access one part of your system can't gain access to other parts of your system or your entire network. Require two-factor identification. For example, an RSA device like the one my bank gave me is a lot more effective than a username and password alone. Just don't follow the example on the right and conveniently attach your username and password to your RSA device. Some people advocate strict segregation of work and personal devices, but Lynn Foster Friedman of Robinson and Foster actually likes bring your own device to work programs because it sets rules and controls rather than simply telling employees don't do it.
So firewalls, compartmentalization, backups, these are really very important when you're dealing with ransomware or trying to avoid being hit by ransomware. Step one of the way most ransomware works is to get a program, to insert a rogue program into somebody's system. Once there, it then tries to migrate as widely as it can within the system, within the network. When it's fully in place, like ET, it sends a message out. It phones home and pulls down the encryption key. And at that point, it can then encrypt and tie up your system. If your system is properly compartmentalized, it won't be able to spread. You limit the scope for the damage. I learned when I was having a system set up for myself. I retired from a large law firm and set up a solo practice, and I brought in people who are skilled in IT, that the messages that go out to request the encryption key often can be tracked and can be stopped right in their tracks. Someone can come in and clean your system. And finally, if you succumb to a ransomware attack, if your system is shut down, having a backup allows you to replace your equipment and get going again without having to depend on getting the data. We've identified several resources here. One of them is a phishing training resource. It'll shoot out examples of fish that are actually safe to anybody within your organization. I've had it shooting at me for about a month or so. It really gets your attention, sensitizes you to things that are wrong. You shouldn't jump for it. There are decryption tools that are being developed to deal with most or many of the families of encryption from ransomware. And companies like CSRC, systems like CSRC, provide information on where the threats are and where the vulnerabilities are, what you have to do in order to patch your system.
Don't we already have insurance? A great number of people are under the impression that they're well served by the insurance policies they already purchase. Let's test that theory. Commercial general liability insurance does provide some coverage for damage or inaccessibility to data, but only if the claim meets the specific triggers and definition of property damage. Some creative coverage attorneys have attempted to find coverage by arguing that a data breach constitutes a publication. But that loophole, if it indeed exists, will quickly be closed. Professional liability insurance responds to claims for damages arising out of professional acts, errors, and omissions. This could apply to failure of the standard of care in a shared BIM, but would likely not respond to a system breach. Property insurance is first-party coverage that protects you and your firm against the destruction of tangible property. While there is some coverage for restoration of data where media or hardware are damaged by a covered peril, that would not apply to the types of breaches that we're discussing here today. Finally, directors and officers insurance or executive risks policies may protect your company and its executives as respects hacking or inadvertent release of employee information. The bigger picture here is that all of these policy forms were developed many years before the emergence of cyber risks, and none are adequately equipped to address it in terms of coverage or the pricing structure. Just like the emergence of pollution policies in the late 1980s, coverage that might be found on existing policies is rapidly being carved away in favor of a new breed of insurance that's specifically designed to affect cyber risk. So cyber risk, there are many policies and forms. There's no standard, but it can be broken down into three main coverage parts. First-party coverage protects you, your company, against the consequences of a cyber breach. It can fund the ransom if your network is held hostage. It will compensate you for the business you couldn't transact because your network was down. It can pay to reconstruct digital assets that you've lost and even pay regulatory fines and penalties. Second, third-party liability pays legal defense costs and amounts that you're legally liable to pay to another party. Examples include network security liability responds to claims alleging that you failed to protect against transmission of malicious code, denial of service attacks, or unauthorized access to your computer systems. Privacy liability protects against negligent use or disclosure of confidential personal and corporate information. Downstream liability protects against the consequences of infecting third-party networks through shared services, such as a BIM, or access to systems, such as subcontracted work. Finally, cyber insurance offers highly specialized services relative to risk control and mitigation. These services include a legal data breach coach to keep you on top of your game, forensic investigative expenses to figure out what went wrong, notification and call center services to alert your customers and vendors of a breach, public relations and crisis communications costs to protect and repair your reputation, and finally, credit monitoring and fraud remediation services to help mitigate the damage. Does your company really need all of this? Probably not. Determining what coverage you need requires a thorough examination of your own firm, the customers and vendors you do business with, and the physical and legal conditions in which you operate. So where to start? The first step is to engage an insurance broker with depth and experience relative to cyber insurance. As a gauge, I'm great at my job, but I'm not remotely qualified to help you design and purchase a cyber program that will protect your firm. So if the person you're talking to doesn't know at least the things we're discussing today, keep looking for a better expert. Second, policies are manuscript. They're individual. They're constantly evolving, so design your program to meet your specific needs. Do you have proprietary designs or methods to protect? Do you regularly engage in government work? Do you gain and permit access to another party's systems? What contractual protections can you command in your business? The list goes on. But if you leave here with no other insight into the insurance industry, remember this. Insurers expect to make money for the premiums they charge for their products. In the infancy of cyber insurance, there's a lot that's not yet understood, and there's a lot at stake. So when you approach insurance markets for cyber insurance, this is you approaching insurance markets for cyber insurance, you need to be ready for battle. First, be prepared to answer detailed and penetrating questions about your network, your processes, and your people. Failure to make the right first impression can greatly limit the coverage you're offered and increase the premium you pay. Again, engaging an experienced insurance broker who knows the markets and has been there before is critical. Finally, determine what limits you need to buy. The decision can be excruciating as you look at all you have at risk and all the premiums you have to pay. So this is our call to action. When you get back to work, share what you've learned today, including the resources that we've provided on the BIM Forum website. After all, when we rip your name from the headlines, you want it to be in connection with giving and receiving what owners want in a spectacular fashion, not for being part of a $200 million cyber breach. Thank you.
Thank you.